Boom, boom, boom. Well, good evening, folks, or good day, wherever you are. I put this stream back a little bit because Brutus the British has returned, and since he was the guy who originally got me into 37. British nationalism, I thought I should probably delay my stream, which is what I did. And I wasn't disappointed because another one of the guys who I like, Atterman, was on with him. And I think Atterman is a good bloke. But anyway, look, this stream has two aims, I guess. The first aim is, of course, it's Armistice Day. It's the day when the First World War ended. In my opinion, the most disastrous war the British have ever been involved in, largely because instead of depending on our wonderful Royal Navy, we raised a huge land army to fight in France and took the casualties that will always entail. That's not the British way of warfare, never was. But for some reason in 1914, guys decided it was. And of course, had there not been a First World War, there would almost certainly not have been a Second World War. Now, I'm a British nationalist. I'm not a European nationalist. I'm not a white nationalist in the strict sense of the term. I'm a British nationalist. I'm an English nationalist for certain, but I equally regard the Scots and the Welsh and the Northern Irish as part of the great British people. And in the same sort of thing, I regard our brothers and sisters in Canada and in Australia and in New Zealand as also of mostly the British blood. Hang on, I'll do a little bit of typing. I'm not very good at this streaming live, by the way, guys. In fact, I've been told by one or two people who are tech savvy I'm almost incompetent to do it. But I think they might have been exaggerating a little bit. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, so I regard the First World War as an utter disaster. And I think it led directly to the Second World War. And I think the First World War was the beginning of the end for Great Britain and her empire. If we could have stayed out of that war, at least in 1914, maybe we could have come into it in 1915 or 1916 or even in 1917 like the Americans did. I think we could have got quite a lot out of it. But by going in 1914 with the brilliant British Expeditionary Force, which in 1914, the BEF, they were professional British soldiers. They were the best soldiers who had ever walked the earth. They could fire somewhere between 15 and 30 aimed rounds a minute from their short magazine Lee Enfield rifles. They were so brave, it was unbelievable. Like a bayonet charge from a British infantry battalion was something that very few other armies could stand up to. And the vast mass of the Germans who in 1914 thought the British Army was so small that the Kaiser allegedly said, if the British Army lands somewhere, we'll send a policeman to arrest it. Well, when the Kaiser's Grand Armies eventually ran up against the British Expeditionary Force at Mons in 1914, and then later at Le Cateau, the British destroyed them. They fired their magazine, the short magazine, the Enfield, so quickly and so accurately that the German half company columns were destroyed. The BAF in 1914 were probably the best soldiers ever to walk the earth, in my opinion. And their song, which no one hears these days because there's a bit swearing in it, the BAF's favorite song in 1914 was "We Don't Give a Fuck" for Old von Kluck and all the German army, and they didn't. Unfortunately, all those brave soldiers were eventually killed in the mincing machine of the German artillery. German infantry couldn't do it, but their artillery could, which was extremely powerful and very numerous. Nonetheless, by 1918, the British Army in the 100 Days, with her Commonwealth allies of Canada and Australia and New Zealand, it was the British Army and the old Commonwealth armies that administered the death blow to the great German army in 1918 and sent them falling back in retreat. Ludendorff called one attack that the British and Commonwealth armies did the Black Day of the German army, because they were just totally defeated. Now, today in the UK is Armistice Day, and we should all take a minute or two at least to remember our ancestors who fought in that war. Every single one of them, as far as I'm concerned, was a brave man who was fighting for his country. I still think it was the wrong war for Britain to be in. And that brings us to the Second World War. Again, if there was no First World War, there would not have been a Second World War. For Britain, anyway. I'm not one of these people who makes excuses for Hitler and the Nazis. I don't. Hitler wasn't a good guy. Stalin was possibly worse, very possibly worse, but Hitler was not a good guy. I would have let the last German and Russian soldier fight each other to death, and I wouldn't have sent the Soviets so much as a second-hand pair of British Army boots. But that's not what Britain did. But yeah. So that's my view about this stuff. I think in terms of British nationalism, what we really need to do is we need to step over the Second World War, certainly, and possibly even to some degree the First World War. We need to go back to that more than 1,000 years of history before 1914, when British guys went and did what they did, and they usually won. I just think that's what we've got to look at. I like all this nonsense about, Adolf Hitler was a good guy. Well, no, he wasn't. Adolf Hitler was not a good guy. And there are Americans who mainly tell us this, and I actually pinched this from the stream that Bruce recently did with Atman. Britain is getting, hang on one second, guys, I'm just going to add Atman to the stream. Good evening, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good, man. It was a good stream you did with Bruce, which I was just talking about. Brutus said a very true thing in that stream, that Britain these days gets this pro-German bullshit mostly from America, which I think is true.
Weak nationalism over there, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, there's loads of Germans in America, of course there is. And I'm not anti-German. Like, I've known and I've been friends with Germans. In South Africa, there's a fairly strong German strain of Afrikaners. Like everyone thinks the Afrikaners are Dutch, but they're not. The Afrikaners are a mixture between people from the Netherlands, people who were the Protestant Huguenot French, and also Germans. That's where the whole Afrikaner thing comes from. And I've had Afrikaner mates who were definitely of German descent.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to Germany like 5 times. I actually really love it there.
Yeah, I
not
like
England.
the Germans. Yeah, I like the Germans, but they're not English. They're not British. They're not. They have their own deal about what they're doing, and the idea that we should just willy-nilly take on board this kind of German stuff is nonsense. And I also think one of the things that's always made me a bit mad is that in Germany, the Natsocks can't get anywhere. Okay, partly for legal reasons, but they just can't get anywhere. And in Italy, equally, partly for the same reasons, fascism doesn't get anywhere. But suddenly, Britain and England are supposed to kind of adopt it, which has always struck me as like brain dead. Because we never had that stuff, even when Mosley and the Black Shirts were a big deal. It was never that big of a big deal in Britain.
Yeah.
And they had some things right. I don't get me wrong, they did. All of those people had some things right, but they had a hell of a lot of things wrong, if you ask me too.
Yeah. What was I going to say? They. I mean, I did actually used to be a little bit into a bit of pan-Europeanism, like a few years ago. I did sort of hold out hopes for it. And to an extent as well, I think like the British nationalism scene is in a bit of a trough or a bit of a rut. And
Yep.
I wouldn't really want to hold down any other European projects, in the same
I
way.
absolutely agree with you. And I do think, yes, British nationalism is in a bit of a rut, but the way I think we can get over it is if to like pinch a phrase from Bowden, if we step over World War II, and even to some degree World War One, which they were kind of the same war, really. If we can step over those two wars and go back to like Britain in pre-1914, that was kind of when Britain was at its height in many respects. And I think we need to go back to that and then beyond that into like the over 1,000 years of British history before 1914 for our inspiration for British nationalism. I mean, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like, Alfred the Great, Henry V, things like the 7 Years' War, when Britain kind of won what was really the first world war in the history of the world. And Britain really won that. Then, of course, we had and again, this is a thing I'm nicking a bit from the stream you and Bruce did a little while ago. Washington was a traitor to Britain. He absolutely was. He was a British Army officer originally. Like a colonial British Army officer, if you like. But if you read books from that era, the Americans in those days regarded themselves as Englishmen and Britons. And the people who supported the American Revolution were actually traitors. They were.
Yeah.
You can't argue they weren't.
Even on their Independence Day, they were flying the 13 colonies flag that still had the British Union flag in it.
Yeah, and even the Stars and Stripes is merely the Americans pinching the British East India Company flag and adapting it. So yeah.
And there is like an aspect to which as well, like a lot of people that were sort of complicit with trying to bring up this American War of Independence they were sort of lying to sort of the monarchy back home and the government about and also lying to their own people about what the state of affairs was with the relationship.
Absolutely true.
Bigging up the taxes that weren't really even being imposed.
Yep, and they were very weak taxes. I mean,
Yeah.
the original thing was in the 7 Years' War, the British people paid for all the troops and the ships and all the rest of it that kicked the French out of North America, pretty much. And then Britain, amazingly, said, well, okay, guys, we've kicked the French, who were your rivals and trade rivals and all that, out of North America. You probably ought to give us a little bit of money to pay for all that stuff we've done. And that was the whole taxation story that was going on in America at the time, which was nonsense, really. It was just crap. But the Whigs in the UK, like what eventually became the Liberal Party, didn't like this at all. So that not only did Britain end up fighting the USA, Britain was fighting France, Britain was fighting Spain, Britain was fighting Holland, the Netherlands, and also most of the Whig Party in the UK, which was pro-American independence. And then people wonder why we lost.
Yeah.
Just, nonsense, really. Listen, guys, I'm going to do a short musical interlude at the moment, because it's Armistice Day. And it's only a short one, but I think we should probably do it if I can work out how to. I'm constantly told I'm not competent to do streams like this, which is probably true. Anyway. There we go. Share audio. Gotcha. This should work. Good.
That's good.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. And we should always remember these guys. They were the bravest of the brave. They weren't fighting for globalism or mass immigration or any of this bullshit that we hear some natsocks talking about. They were fighting for their families and for Britain. And that's all they were fighting for. I mean, my grandfather was one of them, so that's what they were fighting for. They weren't fighting for any of this nonsense we sometimes hear natsocks talking about. However, what I really want to talk about this evening is the future for British nationalism, which is a mess at the moment. I don't know if you would agree with me, Alan. I think it is. We've got what, maybe 8, 9, 10 small parties who spend more time arguing against each other than they do supporting British nationalism.
Yeah, I've basically kind of decided I'm never going to argue with any more leftists because it's pointless.
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
that's a dead movement. We just need to unify what we've got.
yeah. I agree with that totally. I think arguing with Marxists is pointless. It just is. You're never going to convince someone who has the Marxist religion, and it is a religion. And that goes equally for these climate change watermelon types, green on the outside and Marxist red on the inside. All of those people are the same, and you are never going to convince any of them. It's not worth arguing with them. I think we just have to unite to some degree, if we can. And I think we can if we don't go into great details. There are things I don't like about some nationalist parties, okay? I am not a fan of Mark Collett. Never will be. I don't think Mark Collett's changed in 25 years. I think he's the same man now he was 25 years ago. I think he'll be the same man on the day he draws his last breath. I don't think he's capable of changing. He's not intelligent enough to do so. But that does not mean to say that I am against all PA people, because I'm not. I think most PA people are probably good, patriotic British nationalist guys who either don't realize what Mark Collett is, or they just don't pay attention.
I think there's a lot as well that stay in there because they don't see any better solution, and they're willing to put up with some of that stuff because they think it's the only thing we got.
Yeah, absolutely. There isn't anything else. I think that's absolutely true too. Yeah, I that's a good point, mate. I agree with that. I just think that. I mean, I don't know about. Let me ask you, what would you say was the most urgent thing that UK, if it was a nationalist country, needed to do?
Fix the immigration and demographic problem first. I think.
Yeah.
I'm always unsure which way round it should go because you need to. There's a lot of social stuff we need to fix. You need to essentially build your people back up again.
Yeah.
But and sometimes I wonder if you have to do that first before the demographic problem could be talked about. But I don't know. I think maybe the demographic problem needs to be sorted first. You need to get these sort of subversive elements out of the way, and then you can build back up again.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, if it was me, I'd turn around and say, look, if Britain could get, let's say, 5 or 10 years with no third world immigration, I think that would help us enormously. Just that would help Britain enormously. Like the third world minority, in inverted commas, demographic not growing for 5 to 10 years, I reckon that would be a entirely good deal. I can't see any way in which that would be bad. So that's going to be one of my main points this evening, really, is that all British nationalists, no matter where they come from in terms of the political spectrum, whether they're like me, a traditionalist reactionary, or whether they're Nat Socks or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's one thing we could all agree on, I think, and that would be there needs to be a halt to mass third world immigration in the UK. And if we could all of us, with no exceptions, without going on about side subjects and other things that may or may not be related to that, if we could all just say, okay, that's what we want, is an end to mass third world immigration, or if not an end to it, at least like it coming down from like 250, 300,000 a year, which it is at the moment, net. That's allowing for British people who leave. Coming down from that to, let's say, 25, 30,000 a year at most, net. If we could do that, I think that's something all British nationalists could agree on and we could all support. And I just wish we could get to that position where we would actually do that and turn around and say, look, we've got differences about what we want and what we don't want and all the rest of it. But what we want is either an end or an absolutely huge decrease in mass border immigration. Because I reckon that's something that all British nationalists, from whatever background they come, even some civnats, including the absolute full-on white nationalists, everyone could agree on that. And I don't know why we can't possibly do that. I mean, I don't know what you think, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Ann Coulter from America. I think she makes the argument that she says immigration is like a $1,000 bill sitting on the floor and you just have to pick it up. And I think when I made one of my previous videos, I was looking at stats, and even in polls going up until just a couple of years ago, immigration was like the top sort of issue for like 70% of the country. And if you're a good enough rhetoricist, you can draw almost anything back to immigration. I mean, I've made arguments for people where I've said that like the housing market being in the state it is due to immigration. You can literally just be a one issue party just on that.
Yep, I totally agree. I mean, look, it doesn't take rocket science to work out that if you have mass third-world immigration, you're particularly of people with little or low skills, which UK has, your wages are going to be forced down. That's not rocket science. At the same time, it's equally not rocket science that if you have mass immigration, your housing costs, whether you are buying your house or renting it, are going to be forced up. Again, not rocket science. Am I not wrong? Am I not right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You don't have to be a genius to work out if you're going to have mass third-world immigration, you're going to have lower and lower wages and higher housing costs. Those two things alone should be enough to make all real British nationalists against mass third-world immigration. But then on top of that, you have to add things like ever-increasing pressure on your social security system. Again, because Britain does not import all of these brain scientists and Britain doesn't largely import very high grade people from the third world. What Britain imports mostly is very low grade people from the third world. And that puts ever increasing pressure on your social services. It puts ever increasing pressure on your local schools, who have sometimes like 15 different languages, which is ridiculous. It puts ever increasing pressure on your pension system. It puts ever increasing pressure on the National Health Service, despite all this rubbish that we've been told recently about all these wonderful people from the third world who come and run the NHS, which is absolute bollocks, but there we go. Most people who work for the NHS are not doctors or nurses. The vast majority of the people who work for the NHS are administrators and people doing clerk jobs, basically. They have nothing whatever to do with the doctors or nurses who actually treat people.
Yeah, and there's another thing as well, which is that when they say that, for example, like the pensions plan, like they say, well, because of a decline in population, which is post hoc reasoning anyway, because birth rates were still at a good level, you know, up until long after they'd started bringing in mass immigration anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They make this argument that we're just not having enough kids to pay pensions, and you could argue that the pension schemes shouldn't be, you know, this sort of ever growing pyramid scheme. But and ultimately, I don't think people really care that much. I think if you told them it's pensions or immigration, people are going to go, no, I care more about this immigration issue.
Yeah, absolutely right.
But also I can't remember the exact stat, but I think between 2012 and 2018, a majority of the immigrants coming in were actually older. They were retired.
Yeah.
And they were the dependents of previous younger immigrants.
Yeah. Chain immigration.
Yeah, so I think Douglas Murray says it best, where he says these people seem to forget that immigrants get old too. Like
Mm,
you're just pushing, you're just kicking it down the road.
mm.
And this is something that just, it never gets brought up. It never gets talked about, even though it's such an obvious point that everyone knows.
Yep, totally agree. Look, my point here is that look, I totally agree with the 37 word stuff. I do, because it's British, and like I'm British to my core and my soul. But if we could get somewhere where guys like who were 37 and guys who like supported PA could somehow come together and support one thing that we both agree on, I reckon that would be a good thing. Like I've got friends, like I regard some Northern nationalists as a friend of mine. We totally disagree on a lot of politics, but we agree on more than we disagree on. And I just wish that all of the British nationalists from all the different little mini parties could come together on something we all agreed on and say, look, we want this shit stopped. And that means mass third-world immigration, as far as I'm concerned. And obviously also illegal immigration over the channel. Although that's a distraction to me because it's so much smaller than the legal mass immigration. But that was one of the main points I wanted to bring out on this stream, is that let's get together on what we can agree on. And then maybe later down the line, if we can get that, then we can disagree on other bullshit, if that makes any sense. Hang on, I'm just going to let Sojourner join us.
Good evening.
Hello, mate. Nice to see you, man. I hope your din-dins was okay.
It's half finished. Sitting on the side, and I've got a cheap glass of wine now, so I'm ready to join you.
I've always got either a cheap glass of something or other somewhere because it's the only way I can take the modern world. But yeah, did you hear what we were talking about, Sojo?
I have been listening, but what you were just talking about, I'm not sure.
All right. Forgive me for a moment, Armin, while I just explain to Sojo what we were saying, and then I'd love to see what both of you think of it. My point is, I am a full-on supporter of the 37 words because I'm a British nationalist. I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not a European nationalist. I'm a British nationalist. That's why I liked it. That's when I first saw it from Brutus. I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I've kind of thought since I was about 18 years old, or actually a few years before that. But I think if we could get something that all British nationalists agreed on, including guys from PA and all that kind of stuff, like stopping mass third-world immigration, for example, if we could just agree, okay, that's the thing we are going to all concentrate on and try and get stopped, I think maybe we might get somewhere. I'm just asking Adaman and you, Sojo, what you think of that.
Well, I think Brexit has shown that probably won't work. It seems to me that when you have a single issue party, which is it does seem to be what you're suggesting.
No, I'm not saying a party, mate. What I'm saying is, it's one thing all British nationalists could agree on. Not a single issue party at all. Just that one thing.
I think. Oh no, but excuse me, I completely misunderstood. But in that case, I think everybody does agree that migration needs to stop. You will definitely hear that from even the most sort of rudimentary conservatives agree on that point.
Yep.
So there's nothing really to quibble about.
Fair enough. Adaman, what do you think about it?
Yeah, see, I always kind of thought the opposite way. I thought that maybe a single issue party would be the way to go, because it seems that if you have a sustained right wing movement, it just ends up under too much weight after a while from the press and everything else. And this is why I kind of feel like things like what we've seen defund the BBC is quite powerful, because it's pretty innocuous, and when it gets its aim, it will just kind of disappear into the ether, and the people that play key roles in it will try and take some momentum from it and start something new. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, my observation is that like take defund the BBC, for instance. But once that movement runs out of energy, who's going to? It requires one or really both of the main parties to absorb that message and make it the consensus to the point where nobody even talks about it.
Sojo, what do you think of the chances that the BBC will get defunded? Because I think they're pretty good at the moment.
I don't see if to get rid of the BBC or to defund it will require a consensus from both Labour and the Tories.
No, it only requires the Conservatives at the moment, to be honest. They have
yes, but I mean, but that's what I mean is that if you actually want lasting change in anything, then whatever that thing is has to be the consensus among all parties. And that goes for immigration or the BBC. Otherwise, what will happen is that the Tories will do something, and then Labour inevitably come back to power, and they will fund the BBC again.
Okay, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that the BBC is defunded to the extent that they're made a subscription channel. So the BBC can charge what they like, but you have to join it. Okay, there's no license fee. That's my point. If you do that, there's no way Labour are going to make that like for everyone again. They just wouldn't. It's too unpopular.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean,
do you think that Trump's wall, the days are numbered then?
For Trump's wall, who you talking to Sojo?
Yeah,
fair enough.
Well, I mean, the thing about the Trump wall is, I find it very hard to get a sort of grasp on how much of it has been built. Has anything been built?
Because it's several hundred miles, I think.
I mean, this is the thing. It almost seems to me to depend on who you listen to. So if you listen to people in the alt-right, essentially the message is, well, none of the wall has been built whatsoever. But then if you listen to, or even Ann Coulter, for instance, I mean, I haven't looked at her Twitter in quite a while, but I distinctly remember there was a phase when she was posting every day how many miles of the wall's been built, and it's like none. So it's not quite clear to me how much of it has been built. It's very hard for me to get a grasp on what the actual facts are. And so my sort of my perception of it is that not much of the wall has been built. So it's that's the sort of starting place that I'm beginning from.
I think officially they're only building about 10 miles a week. So I think the issue that a lot of people have is it would take like 4 terms in office for Trump for it to actually get finished. Which is
then is then also the question of how much of it is just repairing bits of wall that already exists. How much of it is actually genuinely new wall? So it's very hard to get a grasp on what the actual facts are. But I mean, obviously in terms of migration, the wall that was a sort of symbolic gesture towards immigration, something that people can visualize, it's tangible. But of course, with migration, the main thing is actual raw numbers, people flying into the country, who's getting visas, who's getting green cards, who's getting citizenship. Those are the things that really matter. Chain migration, that's something that not many people know about, but it's hugely influential in the number of people that enter a country. So those things like that are the really important things, like H-1B visas. What's the story with that? So I would sort of ignore what the illegal numbers were or are, and look at what the actual sort of cumulative total numbers for migration are, and then make a judgment on the Trump administration that way, I suppose.
Yeah, to be fair though, I think I'm gonna get in a lot of shit for shilling for Trump so hard, but I think he's cut legal immigration in half.
Yeah, he has cut it for sure. I don't know if it's in half, but he's certainly.
But how much of it? Yeah, but again, I don't want to be a doom merchant, but how much of that is just simply COVID? Because obviously with COVID and the economic downturn and things like that, then there's naturally going to be less migration because there's less people flying.
Well, I was
there's
looking
less
at
economic
net
activity.
migration from.
I think he'd cut it before the COVID nonsense, which I will say here and now, I think it's a scam-demic.
Yeah, I think because the data I was looking at was from 2018.
Right. Okay. So in terms of percentages, how's he doing then?
He went from, I think, because they hit a high, didn't they, during with Obama, where they were getting over 1 million a year net migration, and I think it's down to just under 600,000.
Okay, so 400,000 reduction, which is quite, 40%. I suppose it's
40%.
Yeah, 40%. He did say he was going to try and half it again in his next term, which obviously isn't going to happen now.
Well, I might, Adam, and I don't agree with that. I think Trump might win.
But I mean, the thing is between the border fence and immigration. I mean, this was an issue like when he was running. The idea of there being a border wall was people laughed at it. Like people produced actual TV shows trying to debunk it, and now even Biden doesn't talk about it. Like it's just kind of been accepted in the political psyche. But they might just be not talking about it publicly, and then as soon as they get in, just stop any funding to it or tear it down.
I think the thing for Trump, for the UK, is that if Farage really does rebrand the Brexit pie and starts talking about something around that kind of stuff, I think all British nationalists with any sense have got to back him. Because we have no power whatsoever at the moment, like none. Like you, I, and everyone can talk all we like, and every British person can talk all they like, which they have been doing since back in the days of Enoch Powell. And our elites, in inverted commas, will just ignore us. Whereas if someone like Farage comes in and says, well, look, I'm actually going to stop all this illegal immigration, and hopefully he might turn around and say, look, I'd like to somewhat cut mass legal third world immigration. We've got to support somebody like that because it gets us a little bit of power. And once you start cutting that stuff, you maybe might be able to continue it. That's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of animosity towards Nigel Farage, but I do quite like him. I have hope. He mainly because he had that speech where he was talking about Enoch Powell, and he was saying that you have to be a magnet for public opinion, and that was when I kind of thought, like, I want to think this guy's one of us.
Well, look, at some stage, Adam, and I'm going to do that broadcast to look at the Conservative Party. And I want to go from basically Disraeli up to Enoch Powell, and then from Enoch Powell up to today. And the disgrace, the absolute disgrace that the modern Conservative Party is. The Conservative Party, at very best under Johnson, are globalist shills and Labour Party light. There is nothing about them that is in the least respect conservative. Nothing at all.
What do you think about Tory entryism then?
I'd support it if I thought you could do it, but I think it's very difficult because the modern Conservative Party wants to make the likes of Rishi Sunak big deals, which again, listen, you know what? If an Englishman could move to India and his son could become the Chancellor of India, you know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in charge of the Indian Treasury, I might not be against Rishi Sunak. But you know what? No Englishman will ever do that. It is impossible. And that's why I don't like Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, see, someone said earlier that that a lot of people, I can't find who it was, someone said that a lot of people like parties like PA for the community building. And the thing is, if you do Tory entryism, you do get that. you do get to be part of a nice community of people that are really, really nice, that you can talk about politically about all this stuff, and you'll get on and agree with them about most things, but you're stuck in the Tory party.
Yeah. No, I listen. I was one of those people who, when Johnson took over, I got worried a little bit that the Brexit party were going to pinch enough votes off the Tories that Labour might get in. And like Academic Agent, for example, who is a guy I like, I was totally wrong. All of us should have supported the Brexit party and Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage in the House of Commons would make a huge difference. And at the moment, Boris Johnson is basically a corporate globalist shill, and I don't by that mean he's a pro-Jewish shill. I don't think he gives a shit about Jewish people one way or the other. He's a corporate globalist shill, and completely dishonest. And that's the only thing we know about Boris Johnson. But we sure do know it.
You have to wonder whether he actually believes in anything.
No, he doesn't. I don't think he does.
This whole build back better thing is the worst catchphrase and slogan that there is, and yet he's spouting this this nonsense.
As are Biden and Harris. Their original fucking excuse my language, their original website in the US for the Biden supposed I can't remember what it's called, but like he might become president, which I hope he doesn't, was called Build Back Better. And Boris Johnson supports that all the time, just like he goes on all the time about green bollocks. And green bollocks is basically designed to make Western people poorer, both financially and also in energy. And that's the only reason for it. It's just crap.
Yeah, but to me, it just illustrates that he can't really believe in anything of his own ideas, and he's just simply sort of, importing his ideas from these multinational NGOs, really.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to read the World Economic Forum, their reports. I mean, all of this stuff is public. But it's everything that they've got on their website and in their reports is the kind of thing that Boris is talking about. So, the Tory party don't have any of their own original ideas about anything. They've got no vision. They just simply want to govern. And Labour and and Tony Blair have been well aware of this. That they're the party of governance. They just want to rule, but they don't really care how they rule.
No.
So there is. I mean, we've mentioned this on stream many times, is that there's nothing to get excited about when it comes to the Tory party, not like Labour. I mean, for all of Labour's faults, when someone like Jeremy Corbyn gives a speech, I can actually understand why people want to vote for him, because there's an optimism, there's a dream, there's a vision that he's got, no matter how.
Well, I can understand that if I was not actually ethnically British, I could support Corbyn.
I don't think that's no. I don't. I
difficult. I find it difficult.
I
Sorry, I just find it difficult how you would support Corbyn if you were ethnically British. I don't understand where the appeal there is at all.
Well, because I think there's a problem that, obviously you're biased because you are a nationalist, but if you're just a normie sort of left-wing Labour voter, I can completely understand. Even just a normie in general, I can completely understand why you would hear Corbyn talking about this sort of grand vision for society and how it could be so much better, and be inspired by it. But the Tories don't have any sort of energy or fire like that.
Yeah.
And because I think that intellectually and ideologically, they're just a bankrupt party. They don't really, it's sort of, I think things changed in the 1980s where it kind of went to free market, deregulated capitalism.
In the 90s, yeah. In the 90s.
I think it began with Thatcher, and then it was continued by Major, and then also by Blair. Blair kind of changed it. What did he have? He had the thing called the third way, which in many ways is kind of like a third position, which is quite funny when you think about it. But it's true though, the third way. Who remembers that? I remember my economics teachers in the early 2000s when I was doing my A levels talking about that. The third way. It's a little bit of socialism. It's a little bit of capitalism. It's almost very, very sort of third position, but just rebranded in a completely different way and made palatable to the public. But coming back to what I was, initially talking about, was that really the Tories, ideologically don't have any kind of belief whatsoever, and that's why I think infiltrating the Tory party is so hard, because it doesn't have. There's no romanticism about being a Tory. You can say that about the Labour Party, but there's just nothing to get excited about by being a Tory. They don't stand for anything.
There used to be, but it's true, there isn't now. I agree with that.
Yeah, but even Bowden made this point that really, if there was a lively fringe element to the Tory party that could sort of influence the party in the same way that the far left does with Labour, you don't have that with the Tory party. So it's very hard to make it into a sort of idealistic party. They are the establishment party, really. I don't like Labour at all, but I'll say one thing about them is that there is a streak of idealism about sections of the party. I don't think that exists. Oh yeah, of course. You think about Momentum. I can't believe that Momentum is purely sort of like a globalist psyop. I think that there is sort of genuine left-wing socialist streak.
But it's globalist. It's globalist, Sojo, surely.
Yeah, but it still draws on the kind of idealism of leftism. But there's no sort of idealistic rightism in the Tory party.
But there's nothing British about it. There's nothing even English about it.
Yeah, but again, I think the problem is that you're looking at this through the lens of a nationalist rather than through the lens of a leftist. Well, so in many ways, they are. Leftists are internationalists, so they don't care about nationalism. In fact, they.
Yeah, that's one reason I might drop them out of helicopters. That's one reason I drop them out.
Easy now.
Easy. In Minecraft.
I disavow.
In Minecraft.
No, I agree.
Minecraft.
I mean, as you say, they can speak about all these grand ideas, and all the Tories will do is just talk about tax rates all the time.
Yeah,
and even when you get someone like Boris, though, it's very, people see through it quite quickly, because it is ultimately very hollow. Because Boris will 1 minute bang on about Brexit, and then the next minute he's going, "Oh, this immigration rhetoric is a bit, I don't like it." And then 1 minute he's saying, he's kicking up a fuss about reading the King James Bible verse in church, because he's like, "I'm serious about Christianity." And then the next minute, in response to a terrorist attack, he's saying, "Oh, well, you didn't think Britain would be Christian forever, did you?" And it's like, yeah, this guy, he stands for nothing. None of them do.
No.
And it's interesting you mention that, because you talk about him sort of reciting verses from the King James Bible. I remember watching a YouTube video where he recites in Latin, in Greek, verses from, I can't remember what it was, maybe the Iliad. And he recited it from memory in Greek for maybe 2 or 3, 4 minutes long.
That was Sojo. That was that show he did with Mary. What's her name? Greeks versus the Romans, wasn't it?
No. This was just at a like a sort of intelligence squared debate, in London or whatever. Giving an interview.
That was. Yeah,
that was Mary Beard, wasn't it? Greece
Mary Beard. Bojo was doing the Greeks, and Mary Beard was doing the Romans, and I'm happy to say Mary Beard won, even though I don't actually like Mary Beard very much. But
okay. But
I think that's where it came from.
But I was going to make a point about that, and it ties back in with his Eton education. So I wonder whether actually they're trained so well in rhetoric at Eton that they're almost trained with this kind of charisma and this sort of effortlessness when they talk to the press, that it's very easy for the Tory party and these sort of toffs, for lack of a better word, to lie and to be very good actors, and they can adopt any position they want. Hello?
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I kind of got as you were speaking. I kind of just lost my train of thought. Basically, I was just simply saying that I think that perhaps their education allows them to be kind of duplicitous in their actions, and all of this knowledge that they have, which obviously Boris Johnson does have, that if he can recite the classics, he's obviously a very educated man. Unfortunately, it's not being put to very good use, and I think that's a great shame.
All I was trying to say was, yeah, and you could also look at all these guys' fucking pig skulls, which is not quite so educated, if you ask me.
I don't know what that is.
That was Boris Johnson, and also the wanker who actually caused the referendum on Brexit. They were both pretty reliably said to have done that while at Eton.
Oh, this was in that they were in that group, weren't they? That sort of famous.
Oh, the Bullingdon Club
partying group. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Most impressive, I thought so, Joe. I mean, not really, but yeah.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, in many ways, there's something quite decadent about Eton in the sense that they are given this great education, and yet they just it's kind of almost lost on them in a way. And I just wonder whether the institutions sort of ultimately shape people into being despicable individuals, just despite the intentions that they may have had initially. That's one thing about the cathedral, if you will, that makes me wonder whether it's if for instance, if me or you were to enter into politics, whether we would end up being like Boris Johnson.
No,
because the institution can shape an individual.
Well, I know I wouldn't be, and I strongly suspect Atherton and Sojo wouldn't be either. But yeah, I think you're right, Sojo. I do. Look, you've got to say that the people who run Britain are not pro-British, and that's really been the problem going back to at least the era of Enoch Powell. They're not pro-British. They're pro-something, but it ain't pro-British. I think the last serious politician who was probably Enoch Powell. I don't think even Margaret Thatcher understood it enough. I think she started to just before John Major stabbed her in the back, but it was too late. But I think if you're really going to go back to the last British politician who understood the difference between being a British politician who was pro-British and just a British politician who was pro-globalist, like Boris Johnson, for example, I think it was probably Enoch Powell, and he was decisively rejected by the Conservative Party in favour of that pedophile nonce bullshit guy, Ted Heath.
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of the other sort of problem with democracy, though, isn't it? Is that even if you have a party that should be unified around certain ideas, there's people competing within the party.
Sojo, what do you think of Enoch Powell as a politician?
Well, I mean, I have to be absolutely honest. I don't really know a great deal about him. I mean, I probably just know as much as anybody else, which is, what he's most famous for is the rivers of blood speech. But I've seen Peter Hitchens' remark on Enoch Powell, and he's actually very critical of him. So he's got two criticisms. One is that he effectively privatized and sold off all of these sort of mental health institutions, the asylums, I think, which Hitchens maintains was a disaster for mental health in the UK. And then the other criticism that Hitchens had is that by actually delivering the rivers of blood speech, actually meant that we couldn't have a civilized and proper debate about migration. Now, I don't know I mean, I don't know whether there's anything to that, but that's pretty much all I know about him, really, in terms of politics.
Yeah,
I don't really know a great deal about his. I don't know in depth a lot about his political career, other than that, he left the Tory party. He became a member of the DUP. He represented a constituency in Northern Ireland, which I think is great. He's a unionist. But apart from that, I don't really know a great deal about him.
Cool. Adam?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm always a bit. I'm still not sure really about the Peter Hitchens criticisms. I've read them too, and I do worry there's some merit to them, because he also, I think at one point he said that he thought Enoch Powell was a bit of a careerist and was essentially throwing the conversation on immigration under the bus to not maybe in those words, but to get a leg up in his race. But I also kind of think that to a certain aspect, because Enoch Powell was quite socially inept a little bit, I think he was probably a bit autistic.
He was a professor at the age of 24, so I can imagine that. He was a bit autistic.
He wrote Greek translations when he was in secondary school that people still use today. So he was a bit of a cut above a lot of people. And I think there's also a story that he didn't like having water sort of on his head, so he had to have his wife wash his hair while he's in the bath. It's a very, very odd character when you sort of get under there. But
it sounds like
he was. Yeah, he does. So there's part of me that thinks that maybe.
Hang on, guys. He was teaching Greek in Australian colleges in his 20s, and he was just like Nietzsche.
He was a professor at the age of 24, so he was a prodigious talent. Yeah.
He was teaching Greek in Australia in his 20s, and he was also the youngest brigadier in the British Army in the Second World War. So he was a very considerable person. He was not somebody you can just say, "Oh, look, he was a spurg" or whatever. He wasn't.
No, but I mean, we're only jesting when I said that. I mean, I'm only jesting, but I mean, I think there's something to be said about people who are so gifted like that. There is a kind of, they are, what's the word, like an autistic savant. They're so brilliant that they are flawed, like the flawed genius.
But also he had overwhelming support from the working class when he made his Rivers of Blood speech and all this. Overwhelming support. Something the Tories have never had.
But the problem is that we do have to separate what the public think and what the elite think, and I think this is where the right wing needs to be a bit more like the left. So the left just lie. Tony Blair, I'm just going to be a continuation of the Meiji years, and it was anything but. And I'm kind of at the point now where I think to myself, if you're a nationalist, what you should really do is don't form a new party. Don't join the Conservatives. Join Labour. Pretend that you're progressive. Get into power, and then completely pull the. Well, you say, "Oh no," but who's really got the will?
I don't think you can do that, man. I just don't think you can.
I think you can. You can lie your way in and just bullshit. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm sure you can, but you can't make yourself a nationalist once you're in there. You just can't. I'm sorry.
Of course you can. If Labour can do the opposite, why can't nationalists?
Because they behave on totally different principles.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that I agree. So do you remember that there's a statistic that's going around, or has gone around, that Barack Obama actually deported more people than George W. Bush?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't think it's a case of maybe, Duke. I think it's actually fact. And what I'm getting at is that in many ways, you can get away with a lot more when you pretend to be something that you're not. So if you think about Trump and the sort of hysteria about Trump, is completely what has Trump really done that is kind of
he's reduced immigration by about 40%.
Well, I mean, has he?
Yeah, he did. We spoke about this like maybe half an hour ago, I believe. Afterman had the figures.
But the thing is, though, is that I don't know. I suppose I should really keep my mouth shut, but I have a hard time believing it, Because I thought, do you remember the speech he gave at CPAC, and he said, "Oh, we're gonna have the biggest numbers of legal migration that we've ever had." What was that all about? Do you remember that? Anybody remember that, or is it just me?
Trump's not a white nationalist. He never said he was.
Well, I'm not a white nationalist.
Well, I'm not either. I'm a British nationalist, but I'm a white British nationalist. If I'm really honest, I'm not a brown British nationalist.
I do sometimes wonder if the heavy focus on the wall and all sorts of other stuff has kind of allowed him to slip stuff like this through.
Yeah,
because they've been really fighting him on stuff like the actual border crossing stuff, like really fighting him, even though they're talking about quite small numbers compared to legal immigration.
Yep.
And it seems like that's almost been able to draw his focus off. And they can't exactly jump on and criticize him for cutting down immigration, because they know that's actually broadly what gave him his votes in the first place. I mean, in Belgium, they've got lots of problems, but one of the things they have at least successfully done is both parties, both left and right, now sing to the same hymn sheet on immigration. But you could be right about the left-wing, infiltration thing.
Cool. I don't know, guys. Look, I look at Britain, and it's the best country in the world, as Bruce said on his stream earlier that Hartman was on. It is. Well, it's easily the best country in the world, if you ask me. And I see every other one smashed. I see every other one smashed, so long as Britain was okay. I would. That's just me. It's
I mean, of course I would. I would firebomb Europe if it meant that I could save Britain. If I were to firebomb Dresden all over again to save Britain, I would absolutely do it.
Yeah, I do it.
I'm not saying that I want to, but I would. That's the extent of my loyalty. That I would raise the earth to save our country if I had to. Definitely.
Yeah, that's my religion. Like, I'm not religious. I'm culturally Christian for sure, but I'm not religious. But if I have a religion, it's Britain, and it's to some degree the British Armed Forces, but it's mainly Britain. And I would destroy the whole world just to keep Britain going. That's just what I am. I'll never ever change that. I like our cousins in America. And I love our brothers and sisters in Canada and Australia and New Zealand. But basically, it's Britain. Europe is just Europe. Britain spends most of its time.
You want a Samson option.
I beg your pardon?
So what you're saying is you want a Samson option for Britain?
No, I don't think it's realistic. I just, that's what I really care about is Britain. And all this other bollocks I don't really care about. I look at the world, and I've looked at it for a long time now. And if we do not win in the next 10 years or so in Britain, and the same goes to a large degree in countries like Canada and Australia and New Zealand, if Britain does not win in the next 10 years, we're sunk. Our demographics will be so bad that the real British people will not be able to win without the kind of war that would destroy everything.
Well, I think that's kind of already baked into the cake, mate, really, because I don't, the question of immigration is so fickle. It used to be a very big, a very important topic for the public. But if you look at the polling, it's not very important anymore. And despite the fact that MSM. Yes, but what it shows is that people, the concerns of the public are easily manipulated
by the MSM. Yeah, I agree.
You may say the MSM, but that's a fact, right? But it's fact. It's a fact that they are able to manipulate public opinion. That's a fact. Well, it's a fact in my view.
Less and less people all the time, but yeah, I agree.
But going back to your point, I actually don't share. I'm pretty black-pilled about the state of things, but I actually don't agree with what you just said in theory, which is that in 8 or 10 years that's it. because you're kind of you're predicating everything on country being a democracy, whereas it's entirely.
But okay.
Well, then, so what's your justification or reasoning for why the next 8 to 10 years are really important?
Okay, demographics. I think.
Why would demographics be important if it wasn't? Democracy is the only thing that makes demographics important, right?
So okay. So you're saying if UK was, let's say 20 years from now, if UK was 40% not British, not ethnically British, you think we could come back from that, do you?
Well, anything's possible. You can absolutely get rid of people. Absolutely.
You can. Yeah, you can. But I mean, like, without doing some kind of World War II shit.
No, I think well, this is all sort of hypothetical, but I think you could squeeze the population and get rid of people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You could, but unless
no.
Yeah, that's really.
But do I think it's likely that things are going to change in 8 to 10 years? No, I don't either. So in that case, I really do think everything.
But you are black-pilled, as you frequently say.
Yeah, well, that's why I live abroad.
Yeah. So listen, mate, I live abroad, and I've been slagged off because I live in Australia, having lived in South Africa.
Well, I mean, look at who slagged us off. You know, I mean, it doesn't even matter. But look at who slagged us off. Come on.
Yeah, no, I was just saying. Look, I've never pretended that I live in England now. I moved to South Africa after I left the British Army. I lived there for 15 years, and I've lived in Australia for 20 years. But my son still lives in England, and my son is serving in the Royal Navy. So I would say that means I've got a bigger deal in the UK than many of these people who don't have any kids at all. But that's just me.
Well, my view is that by blood I'm an Englishman. I'm technically 1/4 Scottish and 2/3, or sorry, 3/4 English. And it doesn't matter where I am in the world. I could be on Mars. I would still be an Englishman. So I have as far as I'm concerned, I have a right to have an opinion on the way that my homeland is governed, no matter where I am.
Absolutely.
So they can go fuck themselves, Duke, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no.
And again, I think a lot of these people don't really understand sort of nationalism either, which is that it's not really. That's kind of what the 37 is. It's blood can extend beyond the borders of Britain.
It does. The British race includes Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Absolutely,
exactly. Because you can have ethnically English people in Canada and Australia who have not ever set foot in Britain at all, but they are of the same stock as us.
Totally agree.
So in many ways, I view Englishness and Britishness as actually being independent of the island of Britain.
Yeah, it's sons of the blood.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sons of the blood. I mean, there are Americans who are ethnically British. There are South Africans who are ethnically British. And I have a lot of time for all those people.
For sure.
Adam, what do you think about that?
Well, actually, I was going to ask, Sojo, you said that like immigration had sort of dropped off in the public consciousness, but I mean, I've seen surveys that go up to 2015 where it's still a really big issue, and it's only after 2015 that it's dropped off. And I always put this down to it being synergized with Brexit.
Yeah.
Do you not think that would be true?
Yeah.
I think that is right, but I think that there is I think there's just kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? There's an assumption that because we've voted for Brexit, like we've done the hard work. That's because we all know that Brexit is basically a proxy vote for a vote against migration. So it's almost like, we've done Brexit now. That's kind of migration. We don't have to worry about that. We can go back to worrying about the NHS or whatever it is. So I think that's why maybe people don't worry about it so much. which is dangerous for us because it's, it needs to be in the public consciousness. And
Yeah.
every year that goes by, the situation gets worse and worse.
Totally agree.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm looking at this one here. This is Migration Observatory, which is the one at Oxford, and they list immigration as the most important issue up until in the British psyche up until about late 2016.
Right, but what about now? I bet it's really down. It's like maybe 15%, isn't it?
Right down to the lowest.
It's gone right down, yeah.
Since
meanwhile,
the early 90s.
Boris Babes is completely conning us out of a real Brexit.
But here's the thing: the EU on that same graph sits about 5%, and then in 2016 it rockets up to where immigration was, almost like an exact mirror.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this is a problem: is that the public perception is easily. If you introduce a subject into the mainstream media and everybody talks about it, it will naturally become more important because it's just you're bringing it into the consciousness of the public. But if you deliberately take migration off of the agenda, if Nigel Farage is no longer a party leader and isn't in the news very often, then naturally all the things that he talks about won't be important to the public. So it actually just illustrates just how fickle the public's opinions really are, that they can be driven by one individual, like say Farage or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is again a big black pill, because it's if the public on their own just don't really give a shit unless they're sort of told to.
Well, yeah, you've got to wake them up though, Sojo. I mean, look, we're on the right, okay, and we have various positions on the right, but being on the right, we don't believe everyone is equal. We do believe in leaders and the led, don't we?
Yes, but this is why I don't understand why people are talking about waking up normies, because if you actually believed in those principles, you would think, hang on a minute. The public's opinion doesn't really matter. What matters is what is the consensus among the elites. No,
but if you believe in leaders and the led, then you want to wake up normies so you have people to lead.
Why? The normies, by definition, normies in the working class have no power. That's why they're working class.
Oh, come on, man. That's not totally fair. Look, I agree with one thing that you've said, Jojo, totally, which is that Britain would be better served by getting rid of this working class, middle class dialectic that we have at the moment and talking about white collar and blue collar workers. I think that is entirely correct, partly because the top guys who are blue collar workers, like, guys who run, say, plumbing businesses or electricians or whatever it might be, can often be much better off financially for their families than the more low-level so-called white-collar workers who are running low-level clerical jobs. So I think you're totally right about that. I also think it's a way that nationalists get divided, which is bad. I don't think it's a good plan to divide nationalists that way. So, yeah, I totally agree, Sojo, that we actually should stop talking about working class and middle class and go over to the more American idea of white collar and blue collar workers. I also think it's actually more like the way things are in the 21st century. But you are a bit black pill for me sometimes, mate. I have to say you are.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that I just it's my view that I'm just looking at things dispassionately. And so I just look at sort of class relations and think, well, hang on a minute. The working class are working class because they have no institutional power. That is what makes them working class to begin with. So in the grand scheme of things, they are really not very important. We, as individuals, we are not important. The people who are important are people like Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, key players in the establishment. Those are the people who are important. But, the working class man, he obviously has a role, but, there just seems to be this kind of delusion in the sense that there is this idea that we kind of understand hierarchy, but we think the people at the lowest rung of the hierarchy, those are the working class, have any kind of sway or power. Well, that can't be right. You can't be at the bottom of the hierarchy and have power and ability. So it just doesn't make any sense to me.
But the lowest people on the hierarchy are not working class; they're the underclass these days.
Okay, fine. I mean, okay, fair enough. Second from bottom.
Yeah. Okay. Adam, what do you think about that, mate?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately true. I'm not sure I'm not sure if it's better to go the political path or go the cultural path with that, though. I mean, but if you got to go the cultural path, we have to kind of ultimately take a completely different stance to what people in the nationalist community have been taking.
Yeah.
Which is to be very, very pro, sort of almost a little bit left wing in being very, very, very pro working class.
Yeah, you get quite a lot of the nationalist community that does that. I mean, if you look at the likes of Keith Woods and his turd position, etc., that's kind of where he comes from, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I can't remember who said it. I think it might be some Northern nationalist, and he said in one of his streams that like a lot of these sorts of, especially upper class people from like the old aristocracy. He said like they have a real tangible history and culture literally woven into their family. Like they have a lot to lose.
But doesn't he think working class people do too? Because I kind of think they do.
But hang on a minute. The old traditional aristocracy have no institutional power anymore either. So they are, in many ways, they are just as useless to our cause as the working class.
Yeah. But don't they have the networking and the wealth to pull something off, or be more useful in general?
No, I don't.
This is the thing. This is the thing, right? Are the old traditional aristocracy, are they actually wealthy compared to modern day capitalists? And I kind of have to think that they are not.
Yeah, so just right about that.
I think that really they are kind of they're a hangover. Like their titles, their estates, they're a kind of acronym of the past, and they live in our popular consciousness because they're kind of eccentric, they're a bit odd, they're a bit quirky, they make up the fabric of national life, but they really have no power. I mean, there are no hereditary lords anymore, so they've all been, but
there are some, Sojo, but not many. You're right,
but not many. So, I think actually, in many ways, I've made my point that the old sort of traditional aristocracy have no institutional power and haven't had any for quite a long time now.
Yeah, and they sold their estates to the National Trust, and the National Trust is now being taken over by woke leftists. So yeah. Absolutely.
So they've been superseded by big capital, basically. Neoliberalism has opened a door to nouveau riche individuals and new money that have superseded them in influence.
They started dying off in World War I because so many of them were killed, leading British soldiers and the Royal Navy and all the rest of it, because that was their thing. It was noblesse oblige. They had to lead and say, "Follow me, boys," and they did. To give them their due, they did, and they got killed.
I just noticed a very good point that God's Own Prototypes made in the chat. He's mentioned some aristocrats, such as the Duke of Westminster, who is one of the richest men in Britain. So he's a landowner. He owns most of the freehold in Marylebone and Westminster. So the Duke himself, the senior Duke, died a couple of years ago, maybe. So the person who holds the title at the minute is a young man, the son of the Duke. So he's an example. Yeah, but this is interesting though. So in many ways, he's an aristocrat. But he's an aristocrat in a capitalist mold because he still retains. He's actually managed to use his estate and turn it into capital, which has power and influence. and particularly if you own large stretches of Mayfair and Marylebone, you are a very influential person. But he is, as he says, Pareto principle holds. He is one of the a minority of aristocrats who actually has any influence. But he's somebody that maybe, if we were smart and a bit sort of more intelligent about how we went about our politics, that we could tap somebody like him for funding. But again, he's a young man. He's like maybe a teenager. So you'd have to go to his trustee and his state, I suppose. But yeah, somebody like him would be a funding avenue, I suppose.
But unlike the old guys who were the British aristocracy in 1913, 1914, for example, he's probably not going to get killed leading British troops in whatever war the British Army finds itself in. Unlike the guys in 1418 who actually did. And suffered much higher casualty rates than the privates because they were out in front saying, "Follow me, chaps," as they were required to do. This is why I say, like, to me, the original sin of the British Empire was joining the First World War in 1914. That to me is the whole deal. If you hadn't have done that, all British history subsequently would have been somewhat different. And 1939-45, that the third position guys and the Nat Sox go on about is bullshit, because that was just a continuation of 1480. But that was enough from me. What do you guys think?
I'm not sure now. I'm very black-pilled right now.
Sorry.
Yeah. He has that.
I've got a habit of doing.
He's very, very black-pilled, is Sojo. I like Sojo very much, but he is quite black-pilled.
I mean, I suppose it was quite. My point was quite obvious, because I actually did used to know a guy that was a former Duke who was a delivery driver for a bakery.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, what a fool from grace.
He still had his manor house and all that sort of stuff, but obviously they're not cash rich anymore.
They haven't been cash rich since the 20s with Deaf Jews.
Well, no, I mean, technically, I'm of aristocratic stock, but I grew up poor as shit to a single mum, so. Yeah.
I come from a long line of cannon fodder, but they were all patriots. You see, this is what I was really trying to get at, is that we all come from different backgrounds, but we all have something round about the same kind of vision for Britain in the future. And this is why I'm not particularly about slagging off other nationalist groups. All right, there are things I don't like about other nationalist groups. In particular, I'm not into the Austrian painter was a wonderful guy thing, because that's just bollocks, and he certainly wasn't British. But I think that the British nationalist groups could come together on very basic stuff like, let's either stop or vastly reduce mass third-world immigration. And if we could do that, I'd go, okay, let's all support each other and forget about other stuff until we've done that, and then we'll have another argument or discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, this comes back to the very initial question that you asked me on stream. And I said that I already think that there's broad agreement, not just with the far right, but even grassroots Tories, that yes, migration needs to be stopped.
Yeah.
But you can't just run on. This is why I brought up, like a single issue party, because we can all agree on one thing.
Yeah.
Ending mass migration. But of course, you don't have parties. Well, you can have a party that's a single issue party, but broadly speaking, you have to have a party that covers all sorts of things. And this is where the division really lies. It's in the small things. I've got a book by Roger Scruton called Our Church, which is about the Church of England, and he pointed out that the essentially the Reformation was over very small differences in interpretation of whatever it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. So the point is that very, very small minor differences are the things that can really divide people. And I think that's what happens in nationalism. So yes, everybody agrees on ending migration, but it's the things on the periphery, and PA is a good example of this, where PA have the view of ending mass immigration and repatriating people, and most people can agree with that. But that's not where we disagree. People disagree on the fact that Mark Collett says things about, his favorite books are X, Y, and Z. So it's the things on the periphery that actually separate people and not the main issues. Yeah. So actually, everything that you're talking about, we already agree on. It's just things that are, as I say, on the periphery, that they are the things that separate us and divide us. And so actually, it's virtually impossible to achieve what you want, because we have to agree on a whole bunch of things, and that's what's really hard.
Okay, so let me ask you this, guys. Do you think there is the same kind of separation between the various portions of the vile left that we have on the nationalist right? Because I don't think there is, you see. I think moderate leftists, moderate in inverted commas, go along with extreme leftists just because it gets them somewhere. And I think maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe we could take a lesson from that. And if people could stop spouting their mouths off about bullshit and just talk about the subject they're talking about, maybe riots could come together. I mean, I don't know, Armin, what do you think?
Sorry, what was that?
Well, I'm saying that, look, the way that leftists all kind of support each other. Moderate in inverted commas leftists support extreme leftists. And extreme leftists, by and large, don't slag off moderate leftists. Whereas on the right, we argue about what religion are you? Are you a Christian? Are you this? Are you that? Blah, 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 blah. And I think maybe, on the right, we could take a little lesson from that and say, look, if you're broadly on the right, I'll support you on the issues that I can support you on. And then later on, when we get a bit down the road, if we get anywhere, maybe I'll argue against what you're doing. And that's all I was trying to say, Armin. And Armin and then Sojo, I'd love to hear what you think about it.
At the beginning I said that I don't argue with leftists anymore. I said I'd sort of argue only within the right, because we need to bring everyone together. It's the worst time I've ever had.
Yeah.
Because people are so, there seems to be like this thing in the right where we seem to treat everyone as if they're a bad faith actor, and it's like if you're a traitor, that's worse than being the enemy, like significantly worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're arguing with someone about who's a bit of a wig nat, it just turns into an absolute shitfest very, very quickly. And I have no idea how you overcome that.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think maybe the fractioning just happens. You do your single issue approach. You get a big groundswell of support, and then when everyone factions up, you just hope that you're on top and swallow as much of it as you can.
Mm-hmm. Sojo, what do you reckon, mate?
Well, I think that because they're very different. They're very different situations. So the cultural zeitgeist is in the left's favor. So we have a situation where John McDonnell can go to a rally in London that's got the hammer and sickle, and he can talk about Stalin and communism, and that's not a problem. So it's fine. It's okay to be far left. There is no social penalty to being on the far left. Whereas if you're on the far right, and let's imagine that David Cameron went to a a rally in London where it's not the hammer and sickle draped in the background, but the swastika. That's simply not going to fly. So there is an asymmetry that exists between the left and right, which is that you being far left, but you cannot get away with being far right. And why it's important is because we're very aware of the optics question in the right, whereas the left don't have to worry about this. So they're actually, if we didn't have to worry about optics in the right, then these divisions wouldn't matter because we would just be able to ignore them. But we can't. We don't have that luxury. So in many ways, you can't really compare left and right. So the right wing is at a disadvantage compared to the left, because you can be far left. You can praise communism. You can wave the CCP flag. You can wave the hammer and sickle. And you won't be punished for that. But if you if you wave the swastika, you're going to get fucked. So it's that's why we are divided on the right, and there can be no unity between the fringe right and the sort of and the center ground, is because we don't have that luxury, whereas the left do.
So it's just an optics question, really, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah. I think that if there was no social penalty to waving the swastika, no, I would that. But because there wouldn't be any for PA to exist, would they? Because they would be allowed to be a member of the Tory party. They would be allowed to sit on the fringe of the Tory party, and there would be no social consequences.
See, I've never really understood why PA had to go that German route. Okay, I never understood why they didn't say, okay, we're going to go and wave St. George's crosses and Union Jacks, rather than whatever nonsense Mark Collette believes about the so-called Austrian painter. I never understood that. I don't get it. I don't understand how in 20 years of failure he's never worked out this doesn't fucking work.
But even, imagine being a kind of hardcore monarchist on the fringe of the Tory party. Would you even be able to get away with that? I'm not. No. I think you actually would be able to. I think you'd be a laughing stock. Whereas in the Labour Party, you're communist and it's sort of accepted.
Yeah, you wouldn't get banned, but people would laugh at you. I mean, listen, I watched Bruce's stream earlier, and Bruce was talking about having a king, and I think having a king in the sense of someone like Alfred the Great or Henry V would probably be a good idea, but I don't think it's realistic in the 21st century. I don't see how it's realistic in the 21st century.
Yeah, I don't see how you would actually.
No, go on. I was just going to say that now we're kind of back at that problem where, how do we get the culture in our favour?
I don't know. Look, my deal is we're British. The British are the best people in the world. Great Britain is the best country in the world. And that's what we've got to go on. But we also have to say that being ethnically British is a different story to being British merely because you have a British passport. I mean, that's really what I think.
I mean, the thing is if you can get the culture in your favour, from the top down, you can do a lot more. I mean, I've been trying to red pill a couple of my friends for literally years now, and you can get them to the edge of the bubble, but you can't get them out of it. You need to move the bubble, essentially.
But you can look at people like, say, David Starkey, all right? Now, David Starkey is gay, but it's not the most important thing about David Starkey. He's a very good British historian. totally cancelled over some quite truthful thing he said about black people. Look at Roger Scruton, total to the right of a classical conservative, but got destroyed not long before he died, which I'm sure had something to do with it, just because he said modern buildings are shit, which they are, and we all know they are. I mean,
and he was destroyed. His part of his destruction was aided by the Tory party. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because the Tory party could have just said, you know what, the Independent, go fuck yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who are you to tell us? Who are you to tell us who we can and cannot have as part of our sort of architectural and cultural, portfolio? Go fuck yourselves. But I mean, this is
Roger Scruton, who made a documentary in support of beauty, for fuck's sake.
Mm-hmm. I've got that book as well.
Yeah. Classic.
I for that.
Yeah, listen, guys. I'm not disagreeing with any of you. I just think we need to look at ways as nationalists to come together rather than slag each other off. Because there's not enough of us. We have no power at the moment, and the only way we might possibly get anywhere is if we all come together. And that doesn't mean that we have to cuck to the ideas of the Austrian painter or anything like that, because I don't agree with that at all, and I would always call that out. But if we can agree on stuff, I reckon that would be better than we spend more time slagging each other off than the left does. That's just my view.
Well, I think there's a number of things here. So let's just address the subject of other nationalists slagging one another off.
Yep.
First of all, I think we have to recognize that when we talk about that situation of people slagging one another off, really we are talking about a very fringe section of the nationalist community, which is basically what we're talking about is what we're doing. We're people on YouTube doing a stream, talking about other people who stream.
Yep.
I don't really consider us to be quote unquote nationalists. We're not part of any kind of apparatus or structure that has any sort of bearing or relation in the real world. You know, if we're going to talk about something that is a real nationalist party, that would be something like the Heritage Party or UKIP or the Brexit Party. But what we're talking about is a fictional party that doesn't even exist, PA. It's not even registered, will never be registered, and is just a circle jerk of people talking online on streams that 99.9% of the public are not even aware of. So one thing is that we have to put our own importance into perspective and say that actually we really are not very important whatsoever. Nobody even knows about us. So that's that. I mean, that's the first thing. And then the other thing is that, you know, talking about the Austrian painter, well, that's obviously intimately connected with these online communities that we're part of. But it just strikes me that, you know, if you want to start a nationalist party, there's a concept in medicine called minimum required dose. So when you dose somebody with medicine, you only give them the minimum amount needed for the result that you want. So you don't dose somebody with 10 pills when one pill would do. And so the analogy here is that in the absence of there being an actual conservative party, that doesn't necessitate the need for a national socialist party. If there is a vacant ground of conservative fertile ground that's not being occupied, all we have to do is start up a new conservative party, one that is really conservative. We don't have to go to this extreme of being a far right party when just simply stepping into this void that the conservatives are now neglecting is all that it takes. So something like the Heritage Party or UKIP that's the only ground that we really need to occupy. And it just needs to be a very mild message of we're just gonna clamp down on immigration, and that's it. You don't need to talk about anything else. But we're incapable of doing that.
I would argue that the so-called far right NatSox guys are actually generally not far right. They're actually fairly left in many respects. But having said all that, Adam, what do you think?
I'm not sure. I mean, the thing is, even if you built like a properly conservative party, doesn't it just cut to the left again?
Well, no, if it's really conservative. I mean, the Conservatives didn't cut to the left, say, 150 years ago, or not much anyway.
I mean, the thing is, it's like, I mean, not to take it back to America, but when I was on that stream earlier, Brutus brought up about Carlyle and the great man.
Yep.
And you can kind of see this if you look at American politics, like even with Trump being, potentially not as great as he could be, there's not even a replacement for him.
No,
right, exactly. Who's the successor? Yeah.
But that's the great man theory of history, which is the best theory of history, if you ask me. And if I'm anything, I'm a historian. I don't think history would hardly move at all, but for great men.
Yeah, but we haven't got one right now, and even if we did, we'd only have one at best.
Well, look, the nearest UK has is Farage, without any doubt whatsoever. I mean, I don't know about what you two guys think, but I think Farage is like the only possibility at the moment in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, this is why I'm so black-pilled, because Farage is not enough. You need a Farage that is, you've got Farage, then every single member of the Tory bench is a Farage. Every single member of the Labour bench is a Farage. That's the only way that you have a permanence in the things that we want, that are going to last generations and centuries beyond just us.
Yeah, but for Farage, like, you don't know what Farage is like when he's in the House of Commons because he hasn't been there. And the idea that every single person on the Conservative bench and even more ridiculously on the Labour bench would be a Farage is like, that's ridiculous.
No, but what I'm saying is that those are the conditions that are necessary for us to win on a long-term sustainable basis. So if I was to say to you, what you're saying
is we're lost, is what you're saying there, Sojo.
Yes, but that's why I'm so black-pilled, because I recognise that it's not good enough to just have a Trump. You have to have both wings of the establishment to agree to the point where it's not even talked about, because it's just the consensus that this is the way things are. So if I was to tell you that, in 1910, if you were to poll every single MP in the Houses of Parliament and ask them whether it was a good idea to bring hundreds of thousands of people in from Eastern Europe to come and work in English factories, every single one of them, from Labour to the Liberals to the Tories, would tell you to go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
because there would have been a consensus that we just would not do that. So you have to have a cultural consensus across all parties, left and right, for there to be a genuinely and truly lasting effect and change to what we're going to do. So that's fundamentally why I am so utterly black-pilled, because our ideas are on the fringe, and for this to succeed, everybody in Parliament has to think like we do. This has to be a normie position, that we just don't import hundreds of thousands of people to the point where it's so obvious nobody even talks about it because it's ridiculous to do so.
But Sojo, I mean, look at the 1945 Labour government under Attlee. They were basically anti-British. They wanted to get rid of the British Empire. At least going back that far, and I think you could argue to the first Labour government in the 1930s. Labour have never had a pro-British consensus, never. Like, they used to be more pro-British working class, for sure, but they long ago abandoned that shit. I just don't see how there's ever...
Yes, but therein lies the problem that we have. There is an ideology that is completely at its root and core against
nationalism.
Against nationalism, Labour are internationalists. Always have been.
I agree.
This is why I'm so that the cultural flows and forces and current are so against us, and there are so many things that are And then there's also the introduction of sort of modern ultra capitalism, where it's actually completely advantageous for big firms to bring in hundreds of thousands of people, because
Totally
it grows the economy and it grows their revenues and profits. So there are so many things that are working against us that
we're trying to push uphill. I totally agree. Adam, and what do you think about that stuff, mate?
I've just been reading down what God's Own has been putting in the comments. Hang on, what was the bit I was looking at? He was basically saying about having cultural establishments like British cultural institutions, so that
we used to have those. We used to have things like Oxford and Cambridge, but they're not British
I mean, the funny
anymore.
thing is, actually, I've been thinking about Oxford a lot recently. They featured it in an advert for some TV program, and like I was thinking about, like, because I went to Oxford a couple of years ago and it was a shit heap, and that's probably a bit fierce, but it wasn't great. And it's got this sort of romantic image around it, hasn't it? As like the sort of
dreaming spires.
Yeah, the sort of the place where sort of the British elites were born and this, that, and the other. But it was home to one of Britain's biggest grooming gangs. And I mean, literally after I went up there a couple of years ago, parked my car, walked about 30 feet, and saw some Pakistani guy beating up some old white man on a bicycle.
Really?
It's not a nice place.
I hope you helped him.
Well, yeah, I tried to. I had a couple of mates with me, and he ran off, and then him and his mates raced off in some big old Bentley, and that just characterises sort of Oxford in a nutshell.
Yeah, but my late wife used to go and get her hair done in Oxford, which would take like about 5 hours or whatever bullshit it used to take. And I'd go around the secondhand bookshops there, which are excellent because of the university. And then I'd like secrete myself in a pub somewhere and drink cider until she eventually had her hair done. But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge used to be quintessentially British. And now you've got the Rhodes Must Fall movement. And strangely enough, they want the statue to fall of Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, but they don't want his legacy that allows those third world people to go to Oxford. They don't want
the trust.
Yeah, they don't want the trust.
They want the money.
Yeah, they want the money. They want the statue to fall, but the money's supposed to stay there. And no one in the British government has enough guts to turn around and say, look, come to Oxford or don't come to Oxford. But if you're coming to Oxford, his statue is going to sit there, mate. And that's all we need.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about this. So I don't think it's not really in the sort of purview of the government to intervene on this anyway.
Yeah, but, for Oxford and Cambridge, Sojo, yes, it is.
Well, no, because they are their own institutions, are they not? So anyway, but I mean, the point I was going to make was that actually in Oxford have held quite firm on this issue, because it was I think maybe 5 years ago. Do you remember the black student from South Africa who kicked everything off?
Yeah.
About Rhodes must fall. The slogan "Rhodes must fall" is quite an old
Rhodes Scholar, you mean? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's right. The Rhodes Scholar. It's quite old. So to Oxford's credit, and I think it's Oriel College. I think that's the college that is bequeathed the trust money. To be fair to them, they have held firm so far. Yeah. So maybe they won't cut.
Let's hope they continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they don't,
but so far
it's another. If they don't, it's another nail in the coffin of Great Britain.
Didn't they also let someone graffiti a Rudyard Kipling poem in the library? I might be getting that mixed up with Cambridge.
Yeah, no, they did actually. No, they got rid of a Rudyard Kipling poem and replaced it with some black rap nonsense.
I mean, do you guys think that the idea of defunding something works? I know Viktor Orban's been trying this, where they just defund all the the sort of social science stuff that most of these ideas are bred out of.
Yeah, I mean, I think good idea. Do that. Defund them. I think you've also got to ban them doing it. I mean, one of the good things that Trump did very late, but he did was say you can't teach this fucking what's the word? Critical race theory. Trump banned that, and I reckon that every Western nation should just ban that as a start. Wouldn't be enough, but as a start, just ban it, because it's taught in every single school in Western nations, certainly in British and Australian schools.
I think I have to correct you there. So he didn't ban critical race theory. What he's done is, if I'm right, in terms of federal contracts, if you essentially you cannot teach critical race theory in connection with federal contracts.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's not going to be taught at university. It just means that there won't be any critical race theory training on any kind of federal contract.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. It's better than a kick in the face, but it's not. That's not like a blanket ban on critical race theory.
No,
and of course,
you're right.
Done this at the end of his term. He could have done this 4 years ago. This is what's so infuriating about the right, that they don't help themselves. They simply do not help themselves. Where's Trump been on tech censorship of conservatives? Why has there not been the banning of critical race theory and federal contracts on day one of his presidency? Why is all of this just sort of done at the end of a presidency, at the end of a term?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. They're weak. They have no courage, and they do these things at the very last minute. They should strike when the iron is hot and do it at the very start, and make use of the political capital that they have at the very beginning, and absolutely clean up and decapitate these positions and these programs when they get into power, when people are expecting them to do it, and they've got the political capital. It boggles my mind, Duke. It really does.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, mate. But I also recognise that the president of the United States, as powerful as he is, only has certain powers. I mean, yes, he should have done it 4 years before. I agree with you totally. He should probably have done something about big tech. I'm not sure what he could have done, but yeah, okay.
I think he could enforce antitrust legislation. Monopolies, well, we're going to sort you out.
Yeah, maybe so. Look, guys, Adam, Surgeon Adam, what do you think about this? I got to go to the loo. Please, guys.
How long do you want to go on for? Because it's come up to 11 o'clock here, so I'm going to have to go.
I'm probably going to go on for about another 10 minutes, I guess. But I'm about to go to the loo. So, Adam, if you've got something to say about that stuff, please do.
All right. I do think you're right. I think he had a lot of political capital at the beginning of his term that he probably wasted. And he went chasing after like things with North Korea and stuff like that no one really cared about.
The embassy in what's it called? In Israel. Jerusalem, yeah. I mean, does anybody care anymore? Did they ever care?
No. I mean, they're straight sucking up to Biden now, so
that's the irony, isn't it? Yeah.
God's Own thinks it's Manchester University where they did that thing with the Rudyard Kipling poem.
Okay, I didn't even hear about that, so it's news to me.
Yeah, so maybe Oxford is in the clear. I mean, the thing is, I do sometimes worry. Like I've looked at a lot of this stuff that they've been doing in Hungary, and like they've like defunded a lot of the social science stuff, but on the other hand, I kind of think, does that not also just drive them more towards foreign students to get that funding? Because like gender studies professors are in the top 5 most paid professor careers, for example, and it doesn't seem to and of course that money's got to come from somewhere.
I tell you, it would make me laugh to find out whether these professors in, like feminist studies or critical race theory were actually being financed by foreign students. Now, I find that very hard to believe, but it would be funny if one of our chief exports was that kind of propaganda. I'd be quite shocked to find that out.
Well, this is the thing, isn't Blair? Doesn't Blair have like an institution where they bring people from foreign countries to the UK to be educated in this sort of stuff, to then go back to these African nations and Asian nations?
Oh, what's it called? The Tony Blair. That he's got an organization named after himself, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And it's very corrupt in the same way that sort of Clinton Foundation is tied up in Middle East politics and that kind of thing.
Isn't it the Tony Blair Foundation?
Something like that, yeah.
Should be called the Absolute Traitorous Scumbag Bastard Foundation, but there we go.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question, but it would be funny if one of our exports was critical race theory.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I'm sure that they still that a majority of foreign students don't do that stuff, but they're still gonna sort of use more foreign students to keep those departments propped up. I don't think they would give up on this pet project of theirs just because it was defunded, or they would use foreign students in order to raise the funds to keep it subsidized from within.
But critical race theory was part of the Frankfurt School, surely.
I think it was, yeah, or a large part of it was born out of that.
So it was Germans who eventually moved to America.
Yeah,
I think that's correct. Yeah.
So that's where critical race theory comes from. It's Germans. Okay, some of them were German Jews for sure, but it started with the Frankfurt School, and it was really a reaction to the fact that Karl Marx's idea that the workers, and I know Phil, some Northern nationalists, has talked about this quite a lot. The workers in 1914 did not join the Marxist Party. They signed up in their thousands and in their millions for their nation's armed forces and supported their nation's armed forces because that was where their loyalty lay. And as a result of that, in the 1920s and early 30s, you had these Germans, some of whom were absolutely Jewish, financed by a very rich German, an aristocratic German, formed the Frankfurt School. And then, of course, when Hitler came to power, the Frankfurt School ran away very quickly to the USA, to New York, etc. And from there, they've infected almost every single branch of academia and what Moldbug calls the cathedral. Am I wrong? I think that's pretty much the short version of that.
Yes, I think that's the current understanding of it. Yeah, the question that always goes through my mind is how there has to be a reason why these theories are elevated to the positions that they are. And it just strikes me, and again, this is a kind of, it is an NRX interpretation, although not exclusively, but it's that these kind of courses and these ideologies ultimately help facilitate big capital as well at the same time. So deconstructing gender and identity, and opening up the floodgates for mass immigration. These are things that benefit big capital, and I think that's why they get pushed. It's not because of a conspiracy to wipe out the white race, but these are just emergent properties of a system, a very big and complex system, and it's easy. People just get sort of caught in a trap of just attributing these things to Jews or whatever.
I agree with that.
the situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying there, Sergio. But let's look at the modern world right now, and the main thing that's going all around the world at the moment is this China virus condemic, because it's a con. Like, if you're not at least over 70 and really over 80, and you're not already very, very sick, the China virus is not all that dangerous. Okay, it's really not. There have been bad flu seasons that have killed more people than the China virus has. But there were no worldwide lockdowns. This worldwide lockdown that we're having at the moment, that is everywhere in the whole Western world, and it is the Western world, it's nowhere else. There are reasons for it that have nothing whatever to do with the lethality of China virus, which is not very lethal at all. I think you've got to be a moron if you can't see that, frankly. And when you get people like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris saying "Build Back Better," that is a globalist story that is going on at the moment. And we as nationalists have not really even addressed it, because what we want to do is, some of us want to go on about Super Jews, and some of us want to go on about something else. And nationalists have hardly addressed this at all.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that. I mean, when we talk about when we use the word nationalist, I just sort of think of mainstream nationalists such as Nigel Farage, and there is. This is what I mean: is that there is now a groundswell of opinion on sort of the nationalist right in the mainstream in the UK. People like Delingpole and Farage, who are talking about the lockdown, and that this is, the cure is worse than the disease and that kind of thing. So people are talking about it, but in terms of like the alt-right, as it were, of course, it's just not interesting because white people are dying. That's the narrative of the alt-right. So I think it's always very important to step back and look at the sort of circles that we float in, and realize that there's a whole other world of nationalism and sort of politics that's going on in the UK. And there are discussions taking place, and most of them are not talking about the things that the alt-right are.
Yeah, but I mean, look, all right. In my own case, I am a big fan of the Affirmative Right website that Colin Liddell runs. That's the Affirmative, right?
Yeah.
Who was originally involved very deeply in the alt-right in the old days, back in like 2012, 2013. I know, Sojo, would know about him because of your studies of Bowden. And he's completely rejected all of these guys, particularly the likes of like Richard Spencer at the moment, who is either a Fed or a moron, or most likely probably both. But
just on Spencer, there is a brilliant article on the alternative right that details all of his failings, and it's just like one after another, absolute disasters, fuck ups.
Totally agree. So
it's a brilliant website for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, Adam, and what do you think about this scamdemic that we're supposedly in at the moment?
I don't know. There's a lot about it that's kind of weird. Like the fact that statistically face coverings don't do anything when they should literally stop it dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they use them in surgeries to stop, giving someone with an open wound an infection, and yet it can't stop this bug that apparently. And that's the other thing as well. You see a lot when it comes to the face mask stuff, is that they say all the scientists will say, oh no, it's in water droplets, like big ones that you might spit out by accident when we're talking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the next minute they're showing you a graphic of someone like breathing out this mist of coronavirus into the air. And it's just this constant flip-flopping around, and there's no sort of clear messaging. And I just think that this is, obviously, I think there's I mean, you got that I think it's Naomi Klein. She wrote that book, that left-wing bubble book, where it's called like Disaster Capitalism or something like that. And it very much stinks of that. It's like, but you know, from the left and everything else, they're using this as its inconvenient timing, since we were probably about sort of 6 to 8 months out from a recession, to create a recession that they can control and do something with.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just think, look, if you close down most of the economy, like I live in Victoria in Australia, and we had the longest and hardest lockdown of anywhere, partly because our state premier was a socialist who signed up for the communist Chinese Belt and Road thing, which the federal Australian government are trying to stop him doing at the moment. And also we had the most deaths, because instead of using the Australian Army to do security on hotels for people coming back to Australia, he paid some of his cronies to use private security companies, which had the result that you might expect. Some of the private security guards were screwing the girls and all the rest of it. But anyway, leaving all that aside, about a third of the small to medium-sized businesses in Victoria, Australia, have been destroyed by the lockdown. And I can't help thinking that England, or Britain rather, is going to be in the same position with its second lockdown. But it's not even slightly touching or harming the big multinational corporations who run the supermarkets and the online shit. And I reckon that's done totally on purpose. I really do. I just don't believe it can be any other way. Another reason why they wanted to get rid of Trump in America, because he was not in favor of lockdowns.
Well, there is a whole school of economic thought that sort of turns capitalism on its head, and there's a book called Capital as Power, written by two Jews actually. So that's probably why it's not very popular in the alt-right. But they make the point that in terms of raw power and if you're a capitalist, what situation do you prefer? An economy that's not growing at all, but you're capturing 1% growth, or an economy that is growing by 2% and you're capturing 2% of growth? Well, actually, as in a very cynical way, as a capitalist, you would prefer an economy that's not growing, but you are growing, because the delta between your power and power relative to everybody else is growing. So in many ways, when you look at the lockdown, it's pretty much the same thing. Is that yes, the economy is being tanked, but the relative power of the big multinational corporations and Amazon, Tesco, Sainsbury's, they are actually increasing their power relative to the size of the economy, although the economy itself is shrinking in totality.
Totally agree.
This is good for them because it means that they have more power and more influence, more leverage. So this is a radical review of big capital and how it works. And I suppose people know what crisis capitalism is. But I think coronavirus is really just taking crisis capitalism and taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah, I agree with that. Adam, what do you reckon, mate?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I'm not sure what to do about it, though.
No, nor am I, but I just think that it's a scamdemic. It's like, look, the average age for men to die in the UK is under 80. But most of the people who've died from China virus in the UK have been over 80.
Yeah.
So it's bullshit. I mean, it's obviously bullshit.
But also, it actually makes complete sense that the lockdown is really only taking place in Western advanced economies, because that's actually where the big money's to be made. There's no money to be made in Mexico. There's no money to be made in Brazil, because they're not developed economies. This big heist, this big con, this big scam to basically eviscerate the middle class and the middle in general. can't take place in these countries like India and in Brazil or Mexico, because they're not advanced and developed countries. So there's no looting to be done. But you can loot an advanced economy like the ones that we live in at the minute. But
related to green stuff, which is also only done in those advanced Western economies. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things about the this sort of new school of economic thinking that's posited in this book, Capital as Power, is that neoliberalism is meant to be about sort of making the state smaller. But if we look at the track record of neoliberalism, has the state got bigger or has it got smaller? And I think we can categorically say that the state has got bigger. And so what's happening is that the state is spending more money, but it's spending that money with actual private companies. So in the UK, PFI and outsourcing with the NHS, you have a situation where the government actually becomes a much bigger spender of the overall economy, but it's actually directing those resources to private corporations. So it's complete crony capitalism that allows essentially big corporations to circumnavigate and circumvent competition and just deal directly with governments.
Yeah, no, I agree with that totally. I mean, like, it's just obvious. You don't even have to have a really good brain. You just see what's going on. You can see that's what's happening. I mean, Amazon are loving the lockdowns.
But the thing is that I think this is a problem for the right wing, particularly, say, for the Tories, because so many of the Tories or normie right wingers are sort of, we believe in capitalism, free markets. And so if you were to even sort of bring this up with them, that Amazon is really sort of making hay and making money hand over fist at the expense of everybody else, you're going to get these people like Darren Grimes and Tom Harwood, these other sort of Prosecco Tories who'll say, well, that's just capitalism, baby. Amazon deserves to be number one. Yeah, and but that's not capitalism. That's not free markets in the way that we conceive.
It's corporate globalism. It's not capitalism.
This is that's right. This is corporate globalism. This is not capitalism in the way that we envisage it. These are certainly not free markets, but there is going to be large swathes of the Republican Party and the Tory right who believe that this is actually great and this is free markets at work when it's not. So I think that's also a big problem for the right, and I think that's why the sort of left economics, right socially position for the right wing is such an effective combination if we can get it up and running, because I think normies can see, normies who are not diehard conservatives can see that what's going on is a complete shit show.
I think even most diehard conservatives can see at this stage, because many diehard conservatives in the Shires, for example, had small businesses which are being destroyed by this shit.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, all right, let's go on to something even more controversial before we finish. All Jewish people are bad. I mean, obviously they are, because so many people say they are. Whereas all Christian people are good. Now, does anyone with the slightest little bit of brain believe that what I just said is true? That all Christian people are good and all Jewish people are bad? It's ridiculous. And every single guy with a reasonable brain would say so. But many people on the alt-right don't believe in that. So, like I said, we're going to finish in a minute, but I would like to just present that for people's brains. Look, are there bad Jewish people? Yes, absolutely, there fucking are. But are there bad, non-Jewish people? I would say there are too.
You're going to get an angry worded letter from PA now, I think.
I'm going to get an angry worded letter from loads of people, Alman. But you know what? What I'm trying to do on this stream is try to get the British right wing, the British right wing, not America, not Europe, not everybody else, the British right wing, to like kind of come together on some policy they can support and absolutely drive home to whatever political parties we have in power. And that's all I'm trying to say is that let's stop being childish and ridiculous, which is what we do far too often. I agree, there are bad Jewish people. There were communist Jewish people. There were communist non-Jewish people. And the idea that everything is down to super Jews is fucking childish and ridiculous, and also makes our ancestors look very powerless, which I don't believe for 1 minute.
Yeah,
I just want us to say, look, we're British nationalists. And I don't care if someone is a relatively left-wing nationalist like some northern nationalist or a right-wing nationalist like me. There are many, many things we can agree on and cooperate on. And unless we do that, we ain't going to win. Because that's what the left does all the time. They cooperate and coalesce around policies and just push them.
I actually don't think that we need to worry about this question, because I think that broadly the right wing of politics does not sort of even dabble with these topics. It's only the very fringe, and a fringe that exists on basically obscure forums and YouTube channels that don't have many viewers. They're the only people who indulge in these ideas. So I actually think that it's actually a reflection on us and the people that we sort of associate with, rather than an indictment of the right wing in general. But certainly it doesn't help when these people like PA get elevated in the media. That doesn't help right wing politics at all.
I agree.
But I think the problem is overblown, and it's just we think it's a problem because we're kind of on the periphery of those circles. And I think it just means that we just have to sort of shift ourselves out of them, really.
But we also need to drag a lot of those normies that we were talking about earlier.
No, I don't think we do. I don't think we do.
I think we do, but okay.
The only reason I say this is that I've I've been streaming. I think I got invited on a stream with Brutus back in February this year, and I was just a guy who just watched a couple of videos on channels every now and then. But my impression of this community is basically, there's a mantra that I've sort of got drummed into my head, which is that fringe movements attract fringe people. And what I can tell is that most people in this movement are fringe people. Incels, or they've got bad jobs, they've got no prospects, they're young, they've got psychological problems, maybe they're heavy drinkers. The people in these circles are not normal people. And so I actually think that it's completely unreflective of the general public at large. So
I don't think you're being totally fair there, mate. I know a lot of people, including you, for example, who I wouldn't put in that category at all.
Well, maybe. Well, I've kind of been questioning myself lately, thinking, "Am I normal? Because how the fuck did I find myself here? Is there something wrong with me?"
I reckon you're a pretty good guy. I think Atman's a pretty good guy. I know guys like, let me think, for example, but I think Brutus is a pretty good guy on the whole. There are many people in nationalism who are good blokes. Are we a bit exceptional? Well, yeah, I guess we are, because most people don't go on about politics, do they? But I think you're wrong to say that we're all shitbags. There are shitbags in nationalism, of course there are.
And I'm not saying
I don't think it's a majority at all.
It's my impression that the caliber of people in these circles is pretty low, and the more you move away into the mainstream, the more reasonable people become, and the more intelligent and capable they become. Put it this way, I look in these circles in the sort of this fringe right sort of YouTube sort of milieu, I don't see any talent. I don't see anybody who could be a leader of a party. I don't see anybody who could be part of an apparatus to be part of a party. I can't see anybody who could be fundraisers for a party. I just don't see any talent anywhere. And I just think it's a reflection of fringe people being in a fringe movement.
I'm sorry, Sojo, but I reckon you would be a better leader of PA than Mark Collette.
Well, I'm never going to be a leader of a political movement ever. It's not in my makeup. I actually wouldn't want to do it. I think it's probably the worst thing that you could possibly do socially.
I agree. But if you were in Mark Collette's position, you'd do a better job.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't be difficult, is what I'm trying to really say. I don't know. What do you think, Armin, about that stuff? I don't know. I think there are some very poor people. I think there's a lot of average people, and I think there's some okay people on the right.
I'm actually with Sojo on this.
You reckon everyone's bad, man?
Not everyone's bad, but I mean, I always kind of think that I'm always kind of pushing the idea that we need to sort of make the ideas more acceptable in the mainstream, because we need to broaden our base that we can draw talent from.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Totally agree with that. I do totally agree with what you're saying. And if that's what Sojo was saying, which I didn't really get, then I'd agree with that too.
Yeah, that is broadly what I'm saying. I just don't think that the bench isn't deep enough in these circles. I just don't see enough talent. And you only need to sort of jump into sort of like high Tory, sort of high Tory Twitter or whatever, and you can see that instantly the caliber of people is much higher. You can imagine these people have got sort of managerial jobs, and they're sort of respectable people. They're going to be the kind of people that you put together in a team. They can work out what their objectives are. They can sort of do fundraising. They can actually organize things. But in the fringe right on YouTube, I mean, we're really just talking about neets and incels and just sort of misanthropes, really. So I kind of look at them. I kind of look at it and think to myself, would you even really want to bring these people along into the mainstream? I'd rather keep them in the sort of the dungeons of the internet, to be quite honest with you.
Okay, so Joe, one question in this high Tory Twitter, I'm not on Twitter, but in high Tory Twitter, do they ever talk about demographic replacement and that kind of stuff, or what?
Not really, no. I mean, but no, they won't phrase it in that way. They will just talk about mass migration and migration and immigration, but they wouldn't talk about it in terms of a replacement. Yeah, I think we have to remember that when you start talking about replacement migration, it's almost too much of a shock to the system for most people. I think maybe if you actually talk about it in those kind of apocalyptic terms, that you actually may sort of frighten people to the extent that they don't even want to sort of even look at it.
All right, let me ask you, mate. Like I trust you, and I think you're a good bloke. What do you think Britain's demographic position is going to be in, let's say, 2060?
Well, we already know, based on the projections, that 2060 we're going to be roughly about 50% of the population.
Yep.
Based on current trends, yeah. That's
right. So how
trends can change, but that's what it looks like at the moment. Yes.
Right. So how come these guys on high Tory Twitter, for example, cannot see that, given they're such intelligent blokes? Or don't they care?
They see it. They just don't talk about it. They avoid the more abrasive tones of it, and they talk around it in a more diplomatic way.
See, I don't understand. If you care about Britain, which, like I say, Britain's my religion. It's been my religion since I was probably 7 or 8 years old. But if you care about Britain, how can you not talk about that? because in 2060, Britain's going to cease to exist for all practical purposes, unless something changes in the meantime. That's what I don't get.
There's no point in talking about it in such a way that it drives away possible supporters, though. I mean, it's all about that dog whistling, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but why would that drive away possible supporters by saying, look, if we don't change, it's gone? Like our nation, our country, our 1,250-year history, or whatever it might be, is gone. That's what I don't get.
Yes, but can you not see, but that by talking about it in these terms, that you put yourself in a very tricky predicament, because you are basically saying, well, who's this we? Who's this we, and who's losing what?
White British people.
Right, and once you start going down this path, you are basically putting people into a corner where you can effectively say, "Oh, you sound like a racist."
Well, I am, and I don't pretend I'm not. Like every other human being in the world.
The current cultural zeitgeist, like being a racist, is like the worst thing you can be in most people's eyes.
I laugh if someone calls me a racist, because every human being in the world is a racist. I used to have charge.
You're retired.
I used to have charge of 30 African black soldiers, and they were the biggest racists you've ever made in your life.
Yes, but
that's just how humans are. Like, yes, they liked me because they kind of pretended I was one of them. That's the only reason. And because I was brave and I didn't run away.
Yes, but you see, the problem is that this is not a problem of. I'm quite certain that many black people and Indian people, if you spoke to them, would agree with you. The problem is not black people. It's other. Where's he gone? Duke, where have you gone? he's
Must have internet problems.
I don't want to say when it's kind of directed at him. I think I'm gonna have to. Shit, I've kind of lost my place. Yeah, the problem is it's not it's not black people or brown people. It's other white people. Yeah, that's where that's where you come up with the problem.
Sorry,
you're back.
guys.
Yes, I'm sorry. So just to because I suppose we're gonna have to wrap this up at some point. But yes, I mean you can probably say that to an Indian person and a black person, Duke. But if you said that to another white person, this is where all of our problems lies. Not with Pakistanis or Africans or whatever.
It's other white people.
It's other white people. It's white
traitorous white people, I would say, to some degree.
Yeah, the funny thing is as well, they can almost be quite bigoted themselves in their example. I said a racist joke to a friend the other day, and he was trying to imply he got all pearl clutchy about it, and he was trying to imply that they can't help in the way they are, but we should change the way we are to accommodate them. I'm like, right, but that is itself actually very bigoted by your own standards. But they really want to sit within the cultural zeitgeist to avoid, the condemnation that comes with being called something like a racist.
See, this is what I don't get at all, because like, if someone calls me a Nazi, I get angry because I'm not a Nazi and I'm not even a fascist. But I'm a racist because every single human being in the entire world is actually a racist. We all are. Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter what creed, doesn't matter what race. Humans are just racist. They are. We all have in-groups and out-groups. And the only people who are not allowed to have that at the moment are white people. And I don't like that. I don't like that. But what I especially don't like is when it's applied to British people. Because like some West Indian who comes to England, whether it be they come or their father comes, they're not British. I'm sorry, they're not. Some Bangladeshi or Pakistani who comes to Britain, whether it be them or their grandfather, are not British, and even less so if they're involved in one of these child rape gangs that the British government spends so much time trying to cover up. The people who I detest are not any of them. They're the white British people who won't turn around and say, I'm a white British person, and that means I'm really British. They're the people who really, really get on my nerves.
Yeah, but the problem is that if you've got some white guy and he's got a Sikh friend and he's known him all his life and he's grown up with him and they went to the same school together, I just it doesn't surprise me that this guy, that kind of person would think, well, that Sikh guy, he is British and he's my mate. I can understand why the civic nationalism, that there are civic nationalists and why they believe in it, because they do have a point that a lot of these people do. Tommy Robinson, they're going to have Sikh friends and Hindu friends and black friends, and why wouldn't they consider them one of their?
So Joe, when I was in the British Army, because I was in a British Army infantry battalion that recruited in the London area, my battalion, which was like 700-800 blokes, we had probably a couple of dozen West Indians in our battalion, and some of them were nicknamed Chalky, which everyone thought was funny. And like, I knew one of these guys and used to go out with him sometimes, like when we were on leave. And he turned around and said to me, you know what, mate? The white chicks who I get hold of are fat and ugly, but they're white chicks, so it's all right. And I used to laugh because I don't give a shit about fat and ugly white chicks, to be honest with you. But the idea that he was British, yeah, okay, he was British. He did his duty. I never saw him do anything cowardly. I was his mate. If we'd been in a punch up in a nightclub, I would have supported him as a black guy. But he wasn't British.
Yeah, well, that's your perception of it. But what I'm saying is that now there are people who don't share your point of view.
But they're wrong, Sojo, and we need to convince them they're wrong.
I can't possibly think of a route to, you tell some guy who's born here, maybe never even been to India, and you tell him, oh, actually you're not British.
Is Rishi Sunak British?
Well, it's not a question of what my opinion is. I think you know what my opinion is. But my opinion is not relevant. I am trying to gauge the current and opinion of the nation at large. I don't think if you ask the average person, they agree with you or they agree with me.
I think you're wrong. See, I think that the majority of British people know what.
Sadly, do not think I'm wrong. I'm sad to say it.
No, I think most British people know what British is, and it requires you to be Anglo-Celtic.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, statistically, the amount of people that actually think that is like less than 10%. Well, it's less than about 15% now.
I mean, how many?
Hang on, Alman, according to various bullshit polls.
Right, but here's the thing, right? Let's say everyone secretly thinks this is true, but they won't say it to a pollster.
Mm-hmm.
That's still the heart of the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, no, you have a good
right,
point.
But that goes back to what Sojo's saying is that you kind of have to be careful with your language in that regard. You have to sort of.
Well, then we're lost. Then we're lost. If that's true, I think we're lost.
Well, no, because you can still talk about mass immigration. It's still broadly, popular enough to work in an election and stuff like that. You just. There
will come a point when mass immigration has to stop. I mean, how many people can the island of Britain sustain? And to
100 million? No countryside left at all.
Can you imagine what it would be like living in a Britain with 100 million, 120 million people? Can you?
Vile. It'd totally vile, mate. Totally vile.
It would be like Japan. I mean, but in many ways, Japan has a lot going for it. It's like clean. It's got like an honor culture. People are polite. Yeah. Can you imagine what sort of Britain would be in that kind of density? It'd be an absolute.
Japan is also like at least 98.5% Japanese,
right?
Which helps.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but surely there must come a point where you can't just can't have this endless growth. So at some point there will have to be a narrative that says no more. Now that might be long after I'm dead, maybe in 200 years' time. I don't know.
Nah, man. No, it's going to be way before then. I don't believe that for a second. I think it's going to be way before then. In fact, I think Trump at the moment is the first bump on the end of it. And in fact, I hope that's what Trump is at the moment, is the first bump on the end of this globalist bollocks. I think they tried it with the China virus, and Trump was the other thing they tried to do. And if Trump can fight back, backed by all the real patriotic Americans who support him, maybe we might be able to fight back from here. That's why I like Trump. I'm not a big Trump fan, but the fact that the cathedral, using Moldbug's term, wanted to get rid of him so badly that they were willing to do banana republic levels of electoral cheating might make a difference. Might. I hope it does. And then if Trump wins, maybe we can fight back on the back of that. Maybe.
Everything really kind of does rest with the Americans because they're the hegemonic power of the world. So
yeah, not everything, but yeah, okay.
Well, I think the problem is that with modern capital and culturally we are already a vassal state of the US anyway. In terms of our
no, I don't agree with that.
In terms
more than we should be, but we're not totally, no.
In terms of our own culture, what culture of our own do we really have now? We've got Netflix.
Well, I don't know. I try and push it, but then when I was on the 37 group, every time I tried to push anything that was British culture, I just got Hendrik is gay from a Scandinavian. So,
yeah, but hang on. To separate what is historical culture but what's being generated now that is exclusively British?
Nothing. Nothing. That's why you have to go to history.
Yeah, but in many ways, there is no such thing as kind of indigenous culture anywhere now, because you could be in France or the Netherlands or Germany,
not wrong.
Basically just an invasion of American culture. An invasion of.
You could also be in Indonesia or South Africa or Nairobi, but yeah, you're right. I agree.
So in many ways, all of these cultural forces emanate from the United States as a cultural power anyway. So coming back to what you were saying about Trump, yes, I hope he succeeds. I hope we are laying the groundwork for a vanguard and a renaissance in the American right that can take America away from this kind of globalist trajectory that it's on. Because that will certainly, because once the wind starts to blow in another direction in the US, it will be much easier for people in Europe and elsewhere to go in that direction as well. So I completely agree with your sentiments on that. But we need more than just Trump. There has to be a succession, one after another, of people in the Republican Party who pick up the mantle and the America First baton. And keep going in that direction, because it has to be a sustained and prolonged march back through the institutions. It can't just be a one-off with Trump. It's got to be more than that.
Yeah, sure. Adam, what do you think?
I was going to say, did you want to wrap this up? But
I'm going to give this another couple of minutes because I think what we're talking about is interesting. But if you want to go, you can go, guys.
I suppose all I say is. My hope is that Trump goes all the way, throws a coup, crowns himself king of the United States.
Yeah, well,
Maybe
I don't say that's realistic, but I think President Trump and his supporters have got to fight to the end, because if they don't, we're all going to lose. But I also think that Sojourner brought up a good point. There isn't enough for indigenous British culture anymore. Like, one of the reasons I go on about history is because you've got to do, to paraphrase Bowden, you've got to step over World War II to look at real British history. And if we can do that, then maybe we can get the British people to see the truth. But then, you've got this fucking new series coming out in UK where Anne Boleyn, for God's sake, is going to be played by some black woman, which is ridiculous. I mean, like, and if you can't even stop that, I don't know where we are. I really don't. It's just crazy.
Do you want to leave it there? Because I've got to go to bed, mate.
Yeah, it's been nice talking to you guys. The last thing I would say is, remember the British dead today, not only from World War I and World War II, but also all the other wars in between, like the Falklands War and all that useless, totally useless spilling of blood in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mm.
And we can do better than that. We're British, we can do better than that. And become real British nationalists, blokes. That's the last thing I'd say.